There's this weird thing that happens when you check your bank account and it says something like $214, not zero, not a round number, just $214. And you kind of stare at it for a second, and then you close the app, and then you open it again like somehow the number changed. And it didn't. It's still $214. And you think, okay, fine, I'll start investing next month, or when I get that raise, or when things calm down a little. And somewhere in the back of your head, you know that you've said that before. My name is Josh, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of time thinking about money, specifically about the gap between what we know we should do financially and what we actually do, and why that gap exists, and why it seems to get wider the longer you ignore it. I've talked to people with nothing in their accounts and people with 7 figures quietly sitting in index funds, and what I've found, honestly, is that the difference between those two people is almost never intelligence or luck. It's something quieter than that, something a lot of people miss. And today I want to walk you through something that I think is going to genuinely shift how you see money. Not in a get-rich-quick way, just in a, oh, so that's what's actually happening kind of way. Because when you see your financial life mapped out, from $0 all the way to $2 million in investments, something clicks. You stop seeing investing as this vague, distant thing rich people do, and you start seeing it as a series of very specific, very human stages. Stages that have patterns, stages that have feelings, and honestly, stages that have traps. Now, let's get into it. So you have $0 invested. Maybe you have some savings, maybe you don't. But in terms of money actually working for you, nothing. Zero. And here's the thing nobody really talks about. This stage has a feeling, and that feeling is waiting. You're waiting to feel ready. You're waiting to understand enough. You're waiting for the right moment, the right platform, the right amount, the right sign from the universe. And the whole time you're waiting, inflation is doing something sneaky. It's quietly eroding whatever you do have saved, like a slow leak in a tire. You don't feel it until one day you realize the car is sitting on the rim. The brutal reality of $0 invested is not poverty. Most people at this stage aren't broke. They're paralyzed. There's a difference. Paralysis looks like having $2,000 in a savings account earning 0.01% interest because you're not sure if you should put it in a Roth IRA or a regular brokerage account or maybe a high-yield savings account or maybe just wait because you heard the market might crash soon. And so it just sits there, doing almost nothing, while you read another article about what to do with it. Here's what I want you to hear, if you're at this stage. The cost of waiting is not zero. Every month you delay investing is a month of compound growth you will never, ever get back. That sounds like a cliche, but when you run the actual numbers, it's almost offensive. $200 a month starting at 22 versus starting at 32, same money, same returns, ends up being roughly a $200,000 difference by retirement. Not because you invested more, just because you started earlier. The actionable thing here is embarrassingly simple. Open an account, any account. Put in $50. It doesn't matter if you pick the perfect fund. What matters is that you break the psychological seal, because once money is in the market and you watch it move, even slightly, something changes in how you relate to investing. It stops being abstract. It becomes real. Okay, so now you've got something. Maybe it took you a year, maybe it took you 6 months. You've got a few $1,000s sitting in an index fund and you check it every single day, sometimes twice a day. You refresh the app when the market opens. You feel genuinely upset when it drops 1.3% on a Tuesday afternoon for no clear reason. This is the fragile beginning stage. And I call it fragile not because the money is fragile, but because you are fragile at this stage. Because this is when most people make their worst financial decisions. Not because they're dumb, because they care too much. They're emotionally raw about money that, honestly, at this level, a single bad month at work could replace. But it doesn't feel that way. $5,000 invested feels enormous when you worked hard for it. And so what happens? Market dips 8% in a week, which is completely normal, by the way, happens all the time. And people sell. They sell because it hurts, and they don't have enough experience yet to know that the hurt is temporary and the selling is permanent. The loss only becomes real when you lock it in. There's also a different kind of trap at this level, which is comparison. You start paying attention to investing content online, and suddenly you're hearing about people who turned $5,000 into $80,000 with options, or some crypto play, or some pre-IPO company. And the $5,000 you have in a boring index fund suddenly feels embarrassing, slow, uncool, and that's when people start gambling. And that's almost always when people lose money they couldn't really afford to lose. The real work at this stage is building the psychology of a long-term investor before you actually become one, which means practicing not checking the app every day, practicing not reacting to news, practicing the radical, almost countercultural act of just leaving it alone. If you can get from $1,000 to $10,000 without making an emotionally driven decision, you've done something that a genuinely surprising number of people fail to do. This is the stage I think is the most underrated, most emotionally complex, and honestly most important stretch of anyone's investment journey. And it almost never gets talked about in a real way. You've got, let's say, $40,000 invested. That is not nothing. That is real money. And also, you don't feel rich. You don't feel secure. You feel like you're in the middle of a very long road with no real landmarks. You look back and it took you years to get here. You look forward and $500,000 still feels like a fantasy. You're in the valley, basically. The unglamorous middle. Here's the thing about this stage, though. This is where compound interest starts to become something you can feel rather than just something you've read about. At $40,000, a 10% annual return is $4,000. That's not nothing. That's a car payment for a year, or a vacation, or a few months of groceries. It's real. It's starting to mean something. But the grind is real too. Because in this stage, your contributions still matter more than your returns. You're still the engine. The market is helping, but it's not carrying you yet, which means you have to keep earning, keep saving, keep sending money in month after month during a period when the results feel slow and the sacrifices feel significant. I think about a friend of mine, not going to say his name, he'd be mortified, who spent about 4 years getting from $10,000 to $85,000 in investments. 4 years of pretty rigid budgeting, 4 years of saying no to things. And he told me once that the hardest part wasn't the money. It was that nobody around him really understood what he was building. He'd skip trips. He'd drive a beat-up car. His co-workers thought he was just cheap. They had no idea he was quietly stacking something that was going to eventually change his life. And that invisibility, that being in the middle of something meaningful that nobody else can see, that is genuinely hard. The actionable takeaway here is this. Automate everything you can. Every month before you can spend it, move money to your investment accounts automatically. The people who make it through this stage aren't the most disciplined. They're the ones who made discipline unnecessary by removing the decision entirely. You can't spend what you never see. Something happens around $100,000. It's hard to describe if you haven't felt it, but people who've been there know exactly what I'm talking about. The market starts to matter in a different way. At $100,000 invested, a 10% year means you made $10,000 without lifting a finger. That's roughly what a lot of people make in a few months of actual work. It starts to feel almost surreal, and for the first time you begin to understand, not intellectually but viscerally, what people mean when they say money makes money. This is also the stage where the math gets more interesting and sometimes more stressful, because now a bad year hurts in a way that's hard to ignore. If the market drops 20%, which it has done historically multiple times, you just watch $20,000 disappear on paper. That's not a number you can shrug off. That's a car. That's a semester of college. That's months of your life stored in a number that just got smaller. And yet, the people who stay in, who don't touch it, who keep contributing, come out the other side in dramatically better shape than the people who move to cash just to be safe. History is pretty clear on this. Staying in a diversified portfolio through downturns, as genuinely unpleasant as that experience is, almost always beats trying to time your way out and back in. The lifestyle shift at this stage is also real and worth talking about. You start to feel a quiet kind of confidence. Not arrogance, just security. Like there's a floor under your life that wasn't there before. You could lose your job, and you'd be okay for a while. You could handle a medical emergency without completely derailing your financial life. That feeling, that margin, is one of the most underrated benefits of building wealth that nobody really puts on the poster. $500,000, $1 million. These numbers sound like they belong to other people, and if you're early in your journey, I understand why they feel that way. But here's what's interesting. The people sitting at this level rarely feel as wealthy as you'd expect them to. There's actually a well-documented phenomenon called goal displacement, where reaching a financial milestone doesn't produce the satisfaction you expected, so you immediately shift the goal forward. Hit $500,000, want $1 million. Hit $1 million, want $2 million. The horizon keeps moving, and at this stage, the work becomes less about accumulating and more about not destroying what you've built. Because this is where people make expensive mistakes. This is where people start investing in a friend's business idea, or getting into real estate deals they don't fully understand, or hiring someone to actively manage their money and paying 1.5% in annual fees without realizing that over 20 years, that percentage is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost growth. The biggest threat to wealth at this level is often not the market, it's complexity. It's the introduction of products and people that benefit from your confusion. The simplest thing I can tell you about this stage, boring wins. Low-cost index funds, diversification, tax-advantaged accounts maximized, consistent contributions. The people with the best long-term returns are almost never the ones doing the most sophisticated things. They're the ones doing the simplest things, consistently, for a very long time. At this level, you also start to have real options. You can think about retiring early. You can think about part-time work. You can think about the 4% rule, the idea that you can sustainably withdraw about 4% of your portfolio annually without running out of money over a 30-year period. At $1 million, that's $40,000 a year. Modest, but depending on your lifestyle and where you live, possibly enough. There's a version of millionaire that looks like yachts and champagne, and then there's the version that actually exists for most people who get there. And the real version is kind of quiet, like surprisingly quiet. At $2 million, the math becomes genuinely transformative. A 7% average annual return on $2 million is $140,000 a year. That's before you've done a single day of work. That's just the money producing money. And the wild part is that, adjusted for inflation, your original $2 million stays largely intact. You're living off the growth. This is what financial independence actually looks like. Not a private jet, but a Tuesday afternoon where you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. The thing about this stage that I find most interesting, though, is how invisible it is. The vast majority of people who have $1 to $2 million in investments look completely normal. They drive reasonable cars. They live in regular neighborhoods. They shop at the same grocery stores as everyone else. There's a whole body of research on this. Thomas Stanley wrote about it pretty extensively. And the conclusion is always the same. Accumulating real wealth almost always requires not spending like you have it. Which brings me to something that I think matters more than any specific number or any specific strategy: your relationship with enough. Because if you never define what enough looks like for your actual life, not a theoretical life, not a social media life, your actual life, the finish line keeps moving. You keep optimizing, keep accumulating, keep deferring the life you were supposedly building toward. And that's its own kind of tragedy. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The journey from $0 to $2 million in investments is not a straight line, and it is not fast. It's a series of psychological stages, each with its own traps, its own feelings, its own version of, is this actually working? And at almost every stage, the biggest threat is not the market. It's you, your impatience, your fear, your comparison to other people, your willingness to believe that complicated is better than simple. The mechanics of investing are honestly not that complicated. Invest consistently, diversify, keep costs low, don't react emotionally, give it time. That's mostly it. What's hard is the human part, the part where you have to stay the course during a crash when every instinct you have is screaming at you to sell. The part where you have to keep contributing during the long, boring grind when the results feel invisible. The part where you have to define your own version of enough instead of borrowing someone else's. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that I genuinely believe, which is that every single stage of this journey is available to almost anyone who starts. Not everyone has the same starting point, not everyone has the same income. And I'm not going to pretend that circumstances don't matter, because they do. But the direction is available. The first step is available. The second step follows from the first. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to understand every investment vehicle. You don't need to wait until the market looks less scary or your life looks more stable. You just need to start, and then stay. That's the whole thing, honestly. That's the whole game. Like and subscribe if this shifted something for you, and drop in the comments, what stage are you at right now?